The destruction of your money will cause unemployment to stay high. In Japan, it's been high for 10 years. You have to ask yourself, when people come to you and they say, here's $4,500, go out and buy a car, cash for clunkers. Well, where did the $4,500 come from? It may personally benefit you, but where did the $4,500 come from? We aren't taxing enough, so the money's not there. It has to be either borrowed or printed. I ask a lot of older patients that come into me, I say, would you borrow $1,000 to get a present for your kids or your grandkids? No, it makes no sense to borrow money to give someone a gift. But that's what your government is doing, borrowing $4,500 to give you money. Same with the stimulus check. Here's $250. And your leaders say, go to the mall. Just go to the mall and everything will be okay. This soothing voice. Don't think about it. It's like what happened in Rome. They had bread and circuses, entertainment and food, because they wanted the mob to be distracted. You distract people so they don't think through the problems. You in this room are in college. You need to think through these problems, and you need to be aware that your leaders are letting you down on both sides of the aisle. I come from a movement that talks a lot about reform. We need to obey the Constitution would be one reform. I don't think we've really obeyed the Constitution since the 1930s. After FDR had finally appointed everyone, I think he appointed 8 out of 9 justices ultimately, what they did is they transformed the Constitution into a meaningless document. They said basically the Commerce Clause can mean anything you want. In 1942, there's a famous case. It's called Wickard v. Filburn. And a guy wants to grow 20 acres of wheat in California. The federal government comes in through these New Deal programs and says, no, you can only grow 10 acres of wheat. And he said, try to stop me. I'm going to grow 20 acres of wheat. He fed it to his cattle and he didn't sell it to anyone. He said, by what authority do you come in and tell me to grow 10 acres of wheat? They said, well, by you not selling the wheat, you may have affected the price of interstate wheat. Therefore, we have the power under the Interstate Commerce Clause to regulate you. Well, that's ridiculous. But that is what's happened to government since 1937, is that you've expanded the Commerce Clause, and so they give lip service to the Constitution. But my opinion, and many authorities' opinion is, since 1937, we have not lived in a constitutional republic. We live more in a democracy. And some say, well, that's good. Wilson wanted us to go to World War I to make the world safe for democracy. Do you know what Thomas Jefferson would have done? He probably would have punched him out if he heard that. Thomas Jefferson and our founding fathers hated the concept of democracy. Thomas Jefferson said democracy is where 51% of the people get to tell 49% of the people what their rights are. I think there are rights that are inalienable. They're given to you by your Creator. They can't be taken away. And to say that 51% of the people get to decide the rights is a bad concept. Democracy is an awful concept. What we had was a constitutional republic. And if you leave here with no other message, leave here with the message that we were not intended to be a democracy. We were intended to be a constitutional republic, which means we send representatives to Washington who vote indirectly for what the majority asks. But even those representatives are supposed to be restrained by the Constitution. They asked Nancy Pelosi the other day, by what authority will you pass this health care legislation? By what constitutional authority? And she said, well, she acted as if she'd never even thought of the question. And she finally said, the Commerce Clause. That's what they say for everything, the Commerce Clause. There's currently legislation out in Montana, or there's a movement going, they're going to build a gun completely made in Montana, every part, and sell it in Montana, and they're going to challenge the federal government to come in and enforce federal gun laws on them. And see if the Commerce Clause, and challenge it if something's not even sold outside the state. People say, well, we have these rights, they're being protected. The First Amendment right. How many of you think it should be illegal to buy advertising criticizing a congressman within 60 days of the election? Raise your hand if you think the government should have a law saying it's illegal to criticize your congressman within 60 days of the election. How many think that would be constitutional if we passed a law? That is the law of the land. McCain-Feingold says that within 60 days of the election, I have a taxpayer group, it's illegal for me to criticize my congressman and say, Joe Schmo voted to raise my taxes and I want to kick his his butt out of Washington. Illegal for me to say because of McCain-Feingold. Now, they are looking at this one. They've struck down part of it in the Supreme Court, and the rest of it was just heard recently, and there's a chance it'll be ruled unconstitutional. But here we had a major party candidate who wrote a piece of legislation that's clearly unconstitutional. But nobody blinks an eye, and nobody really even brings it up for discussion. The Constitution is the friend of the people because it restrains government. As you look forward in your life and you decide which political party you're going to be in, which candidates you will support, you have to make a decision. What do you want government to be? Do you want it to be limited in scope or all expansive? If you want it to be everything to everyone, if you want free medical care, realize it's not free. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Someone will pay for that health care. Someone who works will pay for it if you don't work. But that's what it will be. Nothing in life is free. Out of this movement, you're seeing a lot of sort of discontent out there. There are a lot of people who say, gosh, we've got to do something about it. Washington's out of control. I consider myself to be part of that movement. We need to reform Washington, so I propose several reforms. Number one, I think we should limit their terms. There's no reason why senators should be there for longer than 2 6-year terms, and representatives should not be longer than 6 2-year terms. No reason. They all become corrupted by the process. Look at West Virginia. We've got Robert Byrd over there. He's been up there 50 years. He's paid every inch of West Virginia. They get a disproportionate amount of money. The money is based on his seniority. It's not based on the rightness or wrongness of the projects. Look at Alaska, the road to nowhere. They built a road that nobody knew they wanted. It was going nowhere, built on earmarks, built on pork barrel spending, but they had a Republican congressman that had been in power 40 or 50 years. You put term limits in, you'll get rid of this craziness with seniority where the longer they are, the more goodies they bring home. There is no money to bring home. I tell people it's not that the emperor has no clothes, it's that the emperor has no money. You're out of money, and they are stealing your future from you, so you have to bring them home. If you don't know who to vote for, vote against whoever's in office. I think it's a good idea. With reform, there's another thing I proposed. I think they should read the bills before they vote on them. They tell me I need to wait before I can buy a gun. I think they need to wait before they pass any legislation. They need to read it. I propose they wait 1 day for every 20 pages of legislation. They have bills that are 1,000 pages long that are printed at midnight and passed at noon the next day. No one reads the bills. In fact, it's worse than that. They don't even write the bills. Most of the bills are written by lobbyists or high-ranking clerks. The average congressman doesn't see the bill to the very end. When the bank bailout bill came forward, $1 trillion of your money given to Wall Street bankers and owning banks for the first time in our country, there was 12 hours to read the bill, and the day before or 2 days before, lobbyists would call up congressmen and say, have you read Section 42B? We're worried about it. The congressman would respond, we haven't seen it. No one saw the bill till 12 hours ago. We need term limits. They need to read the bills before they're passed. We also need to talk about how we can reform the way money corrupts the system. We all say, well, money's corrupting it. Special interest money's corrupting politics. But then what is the most important thing the media reports on? How much money have you raised? Because we've raised a lot, we're being reported on. Had we not raised much, we wouldn't be reported on. Money's corrupting the system. I propose, instead of limiting your First Amendment right to protest government, I say, if you get a federal contract and you sign a federal contract for more than $1 million, you just make it a clause in the contract that says you voluntarily agree not to give PAC contributions, not to have your senior officers who I'd have sign it also give contributions, and not to lobby